The Sun is a G-type main sequence star, G2V, based on its spectral class. As such, it is informally and not completely accurately referred to as a yellow dwarf. Its light is closer to white than yellow. It formed approximately 4.6 billion, 22 years ago from the gravitational collapse of matter within a region of a large molecular cloud. Most of this matter gathered in the center, whereas the rest flattened into an orbiting disk that became the Solar System. The central mass became so hot and dense that it eventually initiated nuclear fusion in its core. It is thought that almost all stars form by this process. The Sun's core fuses about 600 million tons of hydrogen into helium every second, converting 4 million tons of matter into energy every second as a result. This energy, which can take between 10,000 and 170,000 years to escape the core, is the source of the Sun's light and heat. When hydrogen fusion in its core has diminished to the point at which the Sun is no longer in hydrostatic equilibrium, its core will undergo a marked increase in density and temperature while its outer layers expand, eventually transforming the Sun into a red giant. It is calculated that the Sun will become sufficiently large to engulf the current orbits of Mercury and Venus, and render Earth uninhabitable, but not for about 5 billion years. After this, it will shed its outer layers and become a dense type of cooling star known as a white dwarf, and no longer produce energy by fusion, but still glow and give off heat from its previous fusion. The enormous effect of the Sun on Earth has been recognized since prehistoric times. The Sun was thought of by some cultures as a deity. The synodic rotation of Earth and its orbit around the Sun are the basis of solar calendars, one of which is the Gregorian calendar, the predominant calendar in use today. Name and etymology. The English word sun developed from Old English sun. Cognates appear in other Germanic languages, including West Frisian sin, Dutch zon, Low German sun, Standard German son, Bavarian sunna, Old Norse sunna and Gothic sunno. All these words stem from Proto-Germanic *sunnen. 23-24. This is ultimately related to the word for sun in other branches of the Indo-European language family. Though in most cases a nominative stem with an L is found, rather than the genitive stem in N, as for example in Latin sol, Greek helios. Welsh hall and Russian solnche solntse, pronounced sontse, as well as, with asterisk L greater than R, Sanskrit svarasvor and Persian xvar. Indeed, the L stem survived in Proto-Germanic as well, as asterisk soalen, which gave rise to Gothic sorel, alongside sunno, and Old Norse prosaic sol, alongside poetic sunna, and through it the words for sun, in the modern Scandinavian languages, Swedish and Danish solen, Icelandic solen, etc. 24. In English, the Greek and Latin words occur in poetry as personifications of the sun, Helios. The Sun's convection zone extends from 0.7 solar radii, 500,000 kilometers, to near the surface. In this layer, the solar plasma is not dense enough or hot enough to transfer the heat energy of the interior outward via radiation. Instead, the density of the plasma is low enough to allow convective currents to develop and move the Sun's energy outward towards its surface. Material heated at the tachocline picks up heat and expands, thereby reducing its density and allowing it to rise. As a result, an orderly motion of the mass develops into thermal cells that carry the majority of the heat outward to the Sun's photosphere above. Once the material diffusively and radiatively cools just beneath the photospheric surface, its density increases, and it sinks to the base of the convection zone. where it again picks up heat from the top of the radiative zone and the convective cycle continues. At the photosphere, the temperature has dropped to 5,700 K and the density to only 0.2 grams. During a total solar eclipse, when the disk of the Sun is covered by that of the Moon, parts of the Sun's surrounding atmosphere can be seen. It is composed of 4 distinct parts: the chromosphere, the transition region, the corona and the heliosphere. The coolest layer of the Sun is a temperature minimum region extending to about 500 km above the photosphere, and has a temperature of about 4,100 K, 83. This part of the Sun is cool enough to allow the existence of simple molecules such as carbon monoxide and water, which can be detected via their absorption spectra. 88. The chromosphere, transition region, and corona are much hotter than the surface of the Sun. 83. The reason is not well understood, but evidence suggests that Alfvén waves may have enough energy to heat the corona. 89. Above the temperature minimum layer is a layer about 2,000 km thick, dominated by a spectrum of emission and absorption lines. 83. It is called the chromosphere from the Greek root chroma, meaning color, because the chromosphere is visible as a colored flash at the beginning and end of total solar eclipses. 80. The temperature of the chromosphere increases gradually with altitude, ranging up to around 20,000 K near the top. 83. In the upper part of the chromosphere, helium becomes partially ionized. Above the chromosphere, in a thin, about 200 km, transition region, the temperature rises rapidly from around 20,000 K in the upper chromosphere to coronal temperatures closer to 1 million K, 91. The temperature increase is facilitated by the full ionization of helium in the transition region, which significantly reduces radiative cooling of the plasma. 90. The transition region does not occur at a well-defined altitude. Rather, it forms a kind of nimbus around chromospheric features such as spicules and filaments, and is in constant, chaotic motion. 80. The transition region is not easily visible from Earth's surface, but is readily observable from space by instruments sensitive to the extreme ultraviolet portion of the spectrum. 92. The corona is the next layer of the Sun. The low corona, near the surface of the Sun, has a particle density around 1015 meters-3 to 1016 meters-3. 90 G. The average temperature of the corona and solar wind is about 1 million to 2 million K. However, in the hottest regions it is 8 million to 20 million K, 91. Although no complete theory yet exists to account for the temperature of the corona, at least some of its heat is known to be from magnetic reconnection. 91. 93. The corona is the extended atmosphere of the Sun, which has a volume much larger than the volume enclosed by the Sun's photosphere. A flow of plasma outward from the Sun into interplanetary space is the solar wind. 93. The heliosphere, the tenuous outermost atmosphere of the Sun, is filled with the solar wind plasma. This outermost layer of the Sun is defined to begin at the distance where the flow of the solar wind becomes superalfvénic, that is, where the flow becomes faster than the speed of Alfvén waves. 94. At approximately 20 solar radii, 0.1 astronomical units. Turbulence and dynamic forces in the heliosphere cannot affect the shape of the solar corona within, because the information can only travel at the speed of Alfvén waves. The solar wind travels outward continuously through the heliosphere. 95, 96, forming the solar magnetic field into a spiral shape. 93, until it impacts the heliopause more than 50 astronomical units from the Sun. In December 2004, the Voyager 1 probe passed through a shock front that is thought to be part of the heliopause. 97. In late 2012, Voyager 1 recorded a marked increase in cosmic ray collisions and a sharp drop in lower energy particles from the solar wind, which suggested that the probe had passed through the heliopause and entered the interstellar medium. 98. The heliosphere has a heliotail which stretches out behind it due to the Sun's movement. 99. The Sun has a magnetic field that varies across the surface of the Sun. Its polar field is 1 to 2 Gauss, 0.0001 to 0.0002 T, whereas the field is typically 3000 Gauss, 0.3 T, in features on the Sun called sunspots, and 10 to 100 Gauss, 0.001 to 0.01 T, in solar prominences. 5. The magnetic field varies in time and location. The quasi-periodic 11-year solar cycle is the most prominent variation in which the number and size of sunspots waxes and wanes. 104, 105, 106 sunspots are visible as dark patches on the Sun's photosphere and correspond to concentrations of magnetic field where the convective transport of heat is inhibited from the solar interior to the surface. As a result, sunspots are slightly cooler than the surrounding photosphere, so they appear dark. At a typical solar minimum, few sunspots are visible, and occasionally none can be seen at all. Those that do appear are at high solar latitudes. As the solar cycle progresses towards its maximum, sunspots tend to form closer to the solar equator, a phenomenon known as Sporer's law. The largest sunspots can be tens of thousands of kilometers across. 107. An 11-year sunspot cycle is half of a 22-year Babcock-Leighton dynamo cycle, which corresponds to an oscillatory exchange of energy between toroidal and poloidal solar magnetic fields. At solar cycle maximum, the external poloidal dipolar magnetic field is near its dynamo cycle minimum strength, but an internal toroidal quadrupolar field, generated through differential rotation within the tachocline, is near its maximum strength. At this point in the dynamo cycle, buoyant upwelling within the convective zone forces emergence of the toroidal magnetic field through the photosphere, giving rise to pairs of sunspots, roughly aligned east-west and having footprints with opposite magnetic polarities. The magnetic polarity of sunspot pairs alternates every solar cycle, a phenomenon known as the Hale cycle. 108, 109. During the solar cycle's declining phase, energy shifts from the internal toroidal magnetic field to the external poloidal field, and sunspots diminish in number and size. At solar cycle minimum, the toroidal field is, correspondingly, at minimum strength. Sunspots are relatively rare, and the poloidal field is at its maximum strength. With the rise of the next 11-year sunspot cycle, differential rotation shifts magnetic energy back from the poloidal to the toroidal field, but with a polarity that is opposite to the previous cycle. The process carries on continuously, and in an idealized, simplified scenario, each 11-year sunspot cycle corresponds to a change, then, in the overall polarity of the Sun's large-scale magnetic field. Photons and neutrinos.